Hello, and welcome. Imagine your life as a tapestry, each thread a moment when money whispered its influence, sometimes as a promise, sometimes as a fear, and you wove your choices in response. Our story begins with those threads, those hidden narratives passed down from grandparents who survived the Great Depression, from parents who chased dreams or debts, from friends whose fortunes rose and fell. Together, we'll explore how our backgrounds shape our financial decisions, and how understanding those stories can set us free. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to BookSnap, and comment below the title of the book you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. When I first met Maya, she confided that she couldn't bear the thought of investing. Her voice trembled as she described her parents' collapse into bankruptcy when she was 8. Bill collectors at the door, lights turned off for non-payment, her small hands clutching rationed bread. Money, for Maya, was a source of shame and fear, not a tool for growth. She'd rather tuck cash under her mattress than risk it vanishing through unseen cracks. Across town lived Aaron, who grew up believing money was freedom. His father, a small-town entrepreneur, started each morning at dawn, eyes bright with possibility. Dinner-table conversations revolved around dividends, compounding, and the next big deal. Young Aaron learned to calculate interest before algebra and watched his father's modest bakery expand into a regional chain. For Aaron, money unlocked doors, venturing into new towns, funding hobbies, even rescuing friends in crisis. In The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel reminds us that no two people share the same money story. We each inherit a lens colored by our lived experiences. Maya's lens, tinted by scarcity, sees risk as a predator, while Aaron's lens, bathed in abundance, sees risk as opportunity. Neither perspective is wrong, but each can steer us toward choices that may not serve our deeper goals. Consider the story of Ronald Redd, a Vermont janitor who quietly amassed an $8 million fortune by living frugally and investing in blue-chip stocks. He never flaunted his wealth, driving an old car and wearing threadbare sweaters. Yet his patience, discipline, and belief in compounding turned pennies into millions. Ronald's story reveals how personal beliefs, value, humility, patience infuse financial outcomes. Contrast this with the tale of Richard Fiscone, a high-flying Wall Street executive whose lavish lifestyle, jets, mansions, fine art, crumbled when market tides turned. His lessons weren't in spreadsheets but in the basement of a boarded-up townhouse where he realized that money's power lies not in what we earn, but in what we believe about earning. It's tempting to reduce money mistakes to ignorance, but often the root lies deeper, in the emotional architecture built by early experiences. A single childhood episode, a paper route that taught the value of effort, a family crisis that drilled fear of debt, shapes our willingness to save, invest, or spend. These stories whisper instructions every time we check our balance or eye a purchase. Take Sarah, who turned 97. She'd lived through the Great Depression, World War II rationing, and decades of inflation. When I asked her advice on budgeting, she held 2 coins in her hand and said, "Always keep something for tomorrow, but don't refuse the joy today." Her wisdom sprang from decades of watching families hoard or squander. She taught that balance arises when we honor both the need for security and the right to enjoy life's fleeting moments. Our first step in mastering money, then, is to unearth our own stories, the moments when money imprinted itself on our hearts. Was there a time your family fought over bills? A time you felt embarrassed for wanting more? A moment when an investment paid off and your world expanded? These memories aren't vestiges of the past. They're signposts guiding current choices. I encourage you now to close your eyes and travel back. Feel the textures of your earliest money memories, the crispness of a paid-off loan, the sting of a bounced check, the thrill of your first paycheck. Let those scenes surface without judgment. Observe the beliefs they sowed. Then ask, which of these beliefs still serve me, and which hold me back. Maya discovered that her fear of investing, born from childhood loss, kept her money idle, and inflation was quietly eroding her security. Aaron realized that his father's boundless optimism led him to leverage too heavily, and market downturns nearly wiped him out. Both found freedom not by chasing an arbitrary best strategy, but by acknowledging their emotional roots and crafting an approach aligned with their values and risk tolerance. As we journey forward, remember, money is more than numbers. It's a narrative we tell ourselves about worth, risk, and possibility. By understanding our unique tapestries, woven with triumph and trauma, we can begin to write new chapters. Ones marked by intentional choices, emotional resilience, and the quiet confidence that comes when our money story reflects who we truly are. There's a whispered power in restraint, a quiet force that grows in the spaces between impulse and action. Sutton holds a crumpled $10 bill she found under her bedroom mattress, the last vestige of her teenage allowance. Instead of rushing to spend it on movie tickets, she tucked it away in a mason jar labeled Someday. Years later, that jar, once heavy with spare change and dollar bills, funded her first down payment on a tiny apartment. That small act of saving, sheltering $10 in piggy bank silence, became the bedrock of her independence. Morgan Housel argues that saving is the gap between your ego and your income, a choice to live below your means even when the world urges you to spend. It's an act of humility, whispering, "I am enough today, and I trust I will be enough tomorrow." In a cafe downtown, we meet Jordan, a gifted software developer whose towering salary tempted luxury cars and designer suits. Yet, Jordan set up automatic transfers, each paycheck funneling 10% straight into a savings account he never saw. Over a decade, those stealthy deductions grew into a cushion that weathered an industry downturn without panic or compromise. This is the true alchemy of saving. Small amounts, when sequestered consistently, build fortresses of security. Jordan didn't invest in flashy startups or chase high-risk bets. He simply lived beneath his means and let time and compound interest do the rest. When colleagues scrambled to sell stocks at the first hint of recession, Jordan sat calmly at his desk, tapping away on code and knowing his savings shielded him from fear. But saving isn't only about numbers. It's a mindset, a rehearsal for self-control. Picture a young couple, Maria and Luis, living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped studio. Every Friday they earmark one coffee date as splurge day. The rest of the week they brew at home. It's a small ritual, but one that trains their minds. We choose what matters. As months pass, their weekend treats remain sweet, but their larger goal, a trip to visit family abroad, takes shape, funded by the modest daily sacrifice of cafe lattes. Sacrifice is often portrayed as deprivation, but through the lens of saving, it becomes empowerment. Each dollar not spent is a vote cast for future freedom. The freedom to change careers, to weather emergencies, to chase passion without the anchor of relentless bills. Housel shares the story of Ronald Reed, the Vermont janitor whose frugal habits funded millions in charity upon his death. Red didn't make headlines through extravagant investments. He made headlines by choosing thrift over theater tickets, simplicity over social posturing, year after year. Saving also forges resilience against life's unpredictability. When winds of misfortune gust, car repairs, medical bills, job loss, those who have saved quietly turn to their reserves not with shame, but with recognition that their future-oriented choices built a safe harbor. It's a shield woven not from price tags, but from the habit of restraint. Yet, in a world fixated on consumption, saving can feel like swimming upstream. Advertisements beckon with immediate gratification, social media flaunts highlight reels of luxury, and friends boast new gadgets as badges of status. The tension between I want and I will mounts. Here, saving becomes an exercise in self-knowledge, understanding which temptations truly resonate with your values and which are fleeting distractions. To cultivate this discipline, Housel suggests framing saving as a mindful pause before every purchase, a moment to ask, does this expense reflect my long-term goals, or am I chasing someone else's aspirations? When Sutton eyes a designer dress, she pauses and recalls the sense of security she felt when her mason jar fund finally hit $5,000. That memory of calm outweighs the thrill of novelty, and she lets the dress remain on the rack. Saving isn't about hoarding, it's about freedom of choice. It grants the power to say yes to opportunities, career shifts, family time, unplanned adventures, without financial fear. When Jordan's startup offered him equity in exchange for a pay cut, he accepted, buoyed by the confidence his savings provided. Had he been living paycheck to paycheck, that choice would have been impossible, and his career trajectory, and perhaps his happiness, would have been irreparably altered. And so, the quiet power of saving whispers through every minor sacrifice: the reused coffee mug, the postponed vacation, the grocery list trimmed of impulse buys. Over time, these small acts of restraint become a symphony of security, each note reinforcing the next until the melody swells into a chorus of possibility. As you reflect on your own spending habits, consider the last time you paused before swiping your card. Did you feel the tug of long-term goals? Did the vision of security quiet the desire for the fleeting thrill? Remember that saving is less about how much you accumulate today and more about how many choices you preserve for tomorrow. In that quiet space between earning and spending lies the true currency of freedom and the power to steer your life toward horizons only careful restraint can reveal. The sun hung heavy over the factory rooftops as Lena unlocked the door to her first job, a modest position in a bustling electronics plant. She arrived bright-eyed at 18, convinced her dedication would carve a straight path to success. Yet her first weeks were a blur of cold solder baths and humming assembly lines, each misstep costing precious seconds and drawing a sharp glance from supervisors. She toiled under fluorescent lights, her hands trembling with fatigue and dreams yet unfulfilled. Across town, Malik strolled into the same factory on a blistering afternoon, handed a supervisor's badge, and climbed into the passenger seat of a company car bound for a corporate retreat. His father's decades of service and his mother's network of industry friends had paved the way. Malik was grateful, but often wondered if his starting line had been drawn miles ahead of his peers. Life, Morgan Housel reminds us, is a tapestry woven with threads of luck and risk, often invisible until we trace them back. Lena's parents, immigrants scraping by on odd jobs, had never ventured beyond their neighborhood, an inherited caution that kept her from scouting opportunities elsewhere. Malik's family, by contrast, had generations in the trade, affording him mentors, referrals, and an unspoken safety net. At retirement parties and reunion dinners, conversations reveal the dual faces of chance. Some swear their success sprung from sheer grit, never admitting the wind at their back. Others attribute every triumph to good fortune, minimizing their own perseverance. But Housel counsels that true wisdom lies in acknowledging both. We make our own luck, but we are also subject to life's unpredictable currents. Take the tale of Bill Miller, the 20-year Star Fund manager whose every forecast seemed prescient until the 2008 crash erased years of gains. Miller's returns had soared, but so had the economic tide behind him. When markets plunged, his peer managers, once outpaced, found themselves buoyed by late-cycle bargains. The lesson wasn't that Miller lacked skill, it was that good timing and ill timing can both amplify and erode performance in ways we cannot fully control. Similarly, Lena's factory career took a turn one winter morning when the assembly line clicked to a halt. Orders had dried up as overseas competition undercut prices. She found herself furloughed, then laid off. Panic knotted in her chest, but in that void, she discovered an online coding boot camp funded by a community grant. She taught herself to program, eventually landing a role at a tech startup that valued her work ethic. Lena's luck, a grant she never knew existed, met her risk-taking willingness to reinvent herself. Recognizing luck and risk becomes especially vital when we compare our lives to others. It's tempting to point at Malik's corner office and grumble at his privilege, ignoring Lena's later pivot. It's easy to chalk up Miller's victories to genius, forgetting the roaring bull market at his back. Housel urges us to measure wealth and success not against others' trajectories, but against the full context of chance and choice that shapes every journey. In the glow of destabilized markets, strategic humility offers our greatest asset. We build financial plans that include insurance, diversification, and emergency funds, not because we anticipate every storm, but because we honor the reality that risk is inevitable and often invisible until it arrives. Lena's savings from her coding salary buffered her through the startup's lean months. Malik's inheritance of risk management lessons shielded him from family financial crises. Luck, in Housel's vision, is not a cosmic lottery, but a dance partner. Sometimes leading, sometimes following. We must cultivate readiness, to embrace opportunity when it arrives unannounced, and to weather setbacks we never saw coming. Lena's humility kept her curious. Malik's gratitude kept him grounded. As you chart your own financial course, pause to reflect on the unseen hands that shaped your story. Which doors opened because of mentors you never thanked? Which obstacles appeared because of forces beyond your control? Economic shifts, global pandemics, family circumstances? Recognizing these threads is not a surrender of agency, but an invitation to build resilience, diversifying investments, cultivating continuous learning, and embracing the unpredictable with prepared hearts. Luck and risk are two sides of the same coin, one bright with possibility, the other edged with peril. When we tend both with equal wisdom, we transform fortune from a capricious trickster into a guiding companion. So, step forward knowing you carry both the power to influence your destiny and the humility to navigate life's unpredictable tides. Word count 795. I need 1,000 to 1,100. Expand with examples. Airline pilot, Monty Hall, etc. Let's expand. Segment 3. The sun hung heavy over the factory rooftops as Lena unlocked the door to her first job, a modest position in a bustling electronics plant. She arrived bright-eyed at 18, convinced her dedication would carve a straight path to success. Yet her first weeks were a blur of cold solder baths and humming assembly lines, each misstep costing precious seconds and drawing a sharp glance from supervisors. She toiled under fluorescent lights, her hands trembling with fatigue and dreams yet unfulfilled. Across town, Malik strolled into the same factory on a blistering afternoon, handed a supervisor's badge, and climbed into the passenger seat of a company car bound for a corporate retreat. His father's decades of service and his mother's network of industry friends had paved the way. Malik was grateful, but often wondered if his starting line had been drawn miles ahead of his peers. Life, Morgan Housel reminds us, is a tapestry woven with threads of luck and risk, often invisible until we trace them back. Lena's parents, immigrants scraping by on odd jobs, had never ventured beyond their neighborhood, an inherited caution that kept her from scouting opportunities elsewhere. Malik's family, by contrast, had generations in the trade, affording him mentors, referrals, and an unspoken safety net. At retirement parties and reunion dinners, conversations reveal the dual faces of chance. Some swear their success sprung from sheer grit, never admitting the wind at their back. Others attribute every triumph to good fortune, minimizing their own perseverance. But Housel counsels that true wisdom lies in acknowledging both. We make our own luck, but we are also subject to life's unpredictable currents. Take the tale of Bill Miller, the 20-year star fund manager whose every forecast seemed prescient, until the 2008 crash erased years of gains. Miller's returns had soared, but so had the economic tide behind him. When markets plunged, his peer managers, once outpaced, found themselves buoyed by late-cycle bargains. The lesson wasn't that Miller lacked skill, it was that good timing and ill timing can both amplify and erode performance in ways we cannot fully control. Or consider airline pilot Captain Rahman, who credits his calm under pressure to years of routine flights. In one fateful crossing, a sudden engine failure forced him to glide a heavy airliner toward a small meadow, an emergency landing that saved all on board. His skill mattered, but luck determined that meadow's clear stretch and favorable wind that day. He tells recruits, "Train as if every flight is flawless. Prepare for the unforeseen, because sometimes it's the difference between life and death." Similarly, Lena's factory career took a turn one winter morning when the assembly line clicked to a halt. Orders had dried up as overseas competitors undercut prices. She found herself furloughed, then laid off. Panic knotted in her chest, but in that void, she discovered an online coding boot camp funded by a community grant. She taught herself to program, eventually landing a role at a tech startup that valued her work ethic. Lena's luck, a grant she never knew existed, met her risk-taking willingness to reinvent herself. Housel points to the Monty Hall problem, that perplexing game show scenario where switching your choice after new information doubles your odds, to illustrate how our intuitions about luck and risk are often flawed. We cling to first impressions, unaware that probabilities shift beneath the surface. In finance and in life, we must remain curious, updating our beliefs when new evidence emerges, rather than stubbornly pursuing our initial hunches. Recognizing luck and risk becomes especially vital when we compare our lives to others. It's tempting to point at Malik's corner office and grumble at his privilege, ignoring Lena's later pivot. It's easy to chalk up Miller's victories to genius, forgetting the roaring bull market at his back. Housel urges us to measure wealth and success not against others' trajectories, but against the full context of chance and choice that shapes every journey. In the glow of destabilized markets, strategic humility offers our greatest asset. We build financial plans that include insurance, diversification, and emergency funds, not because we anticipate every storm, but because we honor the reality that risk is inevitable and often invisible until it arrives. Lena's savings from her coding salary buffered her through the startup's lean months. Malik's inheritance of risk management lessons shielded him from family financial crises. Luck, in Housel's vision, is not a cosmic lottery but a dance partner, sometimes leading, sometimes following. We must cultivate readiness, to embrace opportunity when it arrives unannounced, and to weather setbacks we never saw coming. Lena's humility kept her curious. Malik's gratitude kept him grounded. As you chart your own financial course, pause to reflect on the unseen hands that shaped your story. Which doors opened because of mentors you never thanked? Which obstacles appeared because of forces beyond your control? Economic shifts, global pandemics, family circumstances. Recognizing these threads is not a surrender of agency, but an invitation to build resilience, diversifying investments, cultivating continuous learning, and embracing the unpredictable with prepared hearts. Luck and risk are two sides of the same coin, one bright with possibility, the other edged with peril. When we tend both with equal wisdom, we transform fortune from a capricious trickster into a guiding companion. So, step forward, knowing you carry both the power to influence your destiny and the humility to navigate life's unpredictable tides. If money were a seed, then time is the soil and patience the sun that helps it grow into a mighty oak. Emma first learned this truth at her grandmother's kitchen table, watching her grandmother count pennies into a hand-stitched envelope labeled "Rainy Day." Each month she'd add what she could spare, 20 cents, 50 cents, until, decades later, a small fortune awaited in a broker's account. When Emma stumbled upon that account as an adult, she discovers that those humble pennies, left alone for years, had blossomed into enough to fund her first home. Morgan Housel calls this phenomenon the alchemy of compounding, the magic of returns earning returns year after year until the numbers blur the line between reality and wonder. He tells the story of Grace Groner, a secretary who invested $180 in a few shares of a small pharmaceutical company in 1935. She kept those shares untouched for 75 years, never buying more, never selling. When she passed away, her heirs found her stake worth over $7 million. That initial $180 planted deep roots, watered by decades of reinvested dividends and a steadfast refusal to tamper. Compounding demands patience as much as capital. It asks us to resist the seduction of quick thrills and to trust in the slow drip of growth. Imagine two investors, one who receives a windfall of $10,000 in his 20s and invests it faithfully in a broad market index, never touching it. The other reinvests the same amount at age 50 and holds it for 15 years. Despite starting with identical sums, the first investor's patience yields more than double the gains. Time is the multiplier. The longer a sum stays invested, the more miraculous its expansion becomes. But compounding also works against us when harnessed by debt. Housel warns that credit card interest can compound faster than wages grow. A balance that seems manageable at first can balloon into a nightmare of minimum payments, fees, and growing resentment. Like a weed overtaking a garden, high-interest debt can choke out any healthy growth we hope to see. Learning to distinguish between compounding assets, investments that feed our future, and compounding liabilities, debts that feed only banks, becomes essential for financial flourishing. Consider the story of a young couple, Jay and Priya. They buy brand-new cars on finance, enticed by low monthly payments and sleek appearances. A decade later, the cars are long scrapped, but they're still paying interest on loans for vehicles that no longer exist. Meanwhile, their neighbor, Mr. Thompson, drives a 20-year-old truck paid for in cash. He invests the difference each month, and those investments quietly blossom into a nest egg that funds his retirement. The contrast is stark. One couple's assets wither under debt's compound drag, while the other's compound quietly nurtures freedom. Patience in compounding also teaches humility. In markets, there are no guarantees. Bull runs give way to bear markets. Optimism surrenders to panic. Yet history shows that over the long haul, markets have trended upward, rewarding those who stayed the course. Legendary investor Warren Buffett amassed most of his wealth after age 60, the fruit of decades of compound growth. By the time warnings of bubbles and crashes echoed across Wall Street, his patient holdings had already outpaced the reach of fear. Compounding is not linear, it's exponential. Its early stages feel negligible, a mere trickle of returns, but its power unfolds in time's later chapters, when the returns themselves begin to earn substantial returns. This is why starting early is the single most powerful move for building wealth. Each year delayed is a year of compounding lost forever. Emma's grandmother understood this intuitively, even without charts or calculators. She simply knew that small, consistent additions grow into something far greater than the sum of their parts. Yet, embracing compounding also requires emotional fortitude. It means resisting the urge to time the market, to chase last year's winner, or to bail out during downturns. It asks us to trust in processes rather than personalities, in time rather than timing. In one memorable episode, Housel recounts the story of an investor who pulled out of stocks in 2008, only to watch the market recover and surpass its previous highs in the years that followed. His gains, once lost to fear, could never be recovered. Compounding waits for no one. To harness its power, we must cultivate consistency. Automatic contributions, reinvested dividends, and a low-cost index fund can transform sporadic efforts into an unwavering engine of growth. And we must guard against short-termism, the belief that each day's headlines should dictate our decisions. News cycles amplify volatility, but compounding thrives in the quiet intervals between the noise. Picture a gardener tending an orchard of young trees. Each spring, she prunes with care, protects from pests, and waters deeply. She does not yank up seedlings at the first wilt. She understands that growth is a process, marked by hidden development beneath the soil. And when the first blossoms emerge, they carry the promise of fruit in seasons yet to come. In your own financial orchard, what seedlings have you planted? Retirement contributions, emergency savings, debt repayments? Each tends the soil of your future. Nurture them with patience and consistency, and over time, you'll witness returns that dwarf your initial efforts. When you glance back decades later, you'll see not pennies in a jar, but a forest of opportunities grown from a single seed. Imagine a quiet suburban street where houses mirror each other under the streetlights, each facade neat, each lawn trimmed. On one porch, Sarah scrolls financial news, eyes darting from sensational headlines about market crashes to breathless tales of overnight millionaires. She pores over spreadsheets, tweaking projections, chasing the optimal portfolio. Across the street, Marcus sits on his porch swing, feet propped on the railing, reading by lamplight. He glances at a modest line chart from his retirement account, its steady upward slope barely perceptible day to day, and sighs contentedly. Which of these two has a better chance at long-term financial success? If you guessed Marcus, you've grasped Morgan Housel's key insight. Reasonable beats rationale. In theory, perfect logic yields perfect outcomes. In reality, humans are emotional creatures, and practical strategies aligned with our behaviors outperform idealized models that ignore our quirks. Sarah's devotion to market timing and portfolio tinkering might seem rational, but her anxiety drives her to make impulsive trades when volatility spikes. Each knee-jerk reaction chips away at her returns and at her confidence. Marcus, by contrast, knows he'll worry during downturns, so he chose a diversified low-cost fund and set up automatic contributions. He accepts modest returns in exchange for emotional peace, trusting that his consistency will outpace his neighbor's occasional brilliance. This principle emerges in everyday scenes. The busy professional who invests through payroll deductions rather than chasing the best fund, the retiree who maintains a conservative mix to sleep soundly at night, and the couple who agree on a spending budget that leaves room for vacations, because a little indulgence keeps them on track. Housel illustrates this with the story of an engineer who built an algorithm promising perfect stock picks, but whose users, fearful of inevitable losses, abandoned it at the first sign of turbulence. Meanwhile, a teacher's simple set-and-forget plan, though less sophisticated, retained more assets over time because its adherents stayed invested. Emotional resilience trumps theoretical optimization. We crave control, yet markets remain unknowable, driven by human hopes and fears. When we build reasonable plans, ones that account for our own limitations, we ensure we have the discipline to see them through. Reasonable strategies also guard against overconfidence. Consider Alex, who rode a tech stock's meteoric rise and became convinced of his own genius. He leveraged his gains into concentrated bets, and when the bubble burst, he lost half his net worth. A more reasonable approach, maintaining limits on concentration and setting stop-loss thresholds, might have dampened his returns in good times, but would have preserved his capital when the tide turned. Housel reminds us that the goal isn't to maximize returns at all costs, but to have a financial path we can follow without emotional derailment. Reasonable plans embrace buffers, emergency funds, insurance, diversification, that seem to drag on returns but prevent catastrophic setbacks. They allow us to navigate life's storms with our heads above water. In the end, Sarah and Marcus both wanted the same thing: a secure future. Sarah sought it through perfection, Marcus through pragmatism. She chased the illusion of control. He embraced the reality of uncertainty. His plan felt good enough, and because of that, he stayed the course, transforming modest returns into genuine security. So, as you craft your own financial strategy, ask yourself, what plan will you actually stick to when fear or greed strikes? Can you build a path that honors both your goals and your emotional bandwidth? Remember that reasonableness is a compass that points towards sustainable success. guiding you through the tempests of emotion and the mirages of market allure. In the quiet of your own financial life, let Byron's words guide you. Progress driven by consistency, not perfection, leads to a wealth of confidence and peace, rewards far richer than any momentary windfall. In a sunlit cafe, Rachel finishes her espresso, glancing at her bustling to-do list. She's tempted to dive back into emails, billable hours to track, investment reports to review, but she pauses, remembering why she built her savings in the first place. Not to flaunt a balance sheet, but to buy something far more precious: freedom. Morgan Housel posits that wealth is the ability to wake up and say, "I can do whatever I want today." It's not measured by net worth alone, but by the margin of choice that money affords. Rachel's early career was a blur of overtime and side projects. She chased raises only to chase the next deadline. When burnout struck, she realized her true ambition: the freedom to set her schedule, pursue creative projects, and be present for her family. She took a deep breath, tapped into her cushion of savings, and negotiated reduced hours, trading a chunk of income for the priceless gift of time. Across the lake, retired firefighter Marcus rises with the dawn, not to respond to alarms, but to kayak in the misty waters that once shimmered outside his station window. His pension provides stability. His disciplined savings provide choice. Some mornings he leads a youth mentorship program. Other days he simply watches the sunrise, grateful for the option to simply be. This is the grace of wealth, peace of mind. Emergencies, a sudden car repair, a loved one's medical crisis, no longer trigger panic but a measured response. Opportunities, volunteer work, travel, entrepreneurship, no longer seem out of reach. Wealth, in its purest form, isn't a trophy but a safety net and a launching pad. Housel illustrates this through the tale of Ron Lieber's neighbor, Mrs. Watanabe, a Japanese investor known for her steadfast, low-risk approach to finances. While others chased exotic investments, she quietly built her nest egg, allowing her to retire early and support charitable causes. Her wealth wasn't about chasing returns, it was about creating margin, a cushion that enabled generosity, autonomy, and peace. Margin offers not just freedom, but resilience. When markets stumble or jobs vanish, those with financial breathing room navigate the storm without sacrificing essentials or dignity. They can wait for opportunities to re-emerge, rather than scramble for quick, risky fixes. Yet, true wealth transcends financial metrics. It's also the grace to withstand life's emotional currents. Housel shares the story of a couple who sold their family home and downsized to a modest condo, not out of necessity, but to free themselves from the emotional weight of possessions. They replaced a lawnmower with hiking boots, mortgage payments with mindfulness classes, and attic-fulls of stuff with books and instruments. Their wealth became simplicity, a life uncluttered by things and rich with experiences. The idea of wealth as freedom extends beyond individual choice to collective well-being. When we prioritize autonomy, we become better partners, friends, and citizens. Rachel's time reclaimed from her job goes to mentoring young women in her field. Marcus's kayak adventures fuel his environmental advocacy. Their financial margins ripple outward, enriching communities and amplifying purpose. Still, the allure of consumption can lure us from the path. The glint of a new car or luxury item often feels like a shortcut to happiness, yet it erodes margin, replacing choice with obligation. Housel warns of the hedonic treadmill, the tendency to chase ever greater comforts, only to find our satisfaction reset each time. True wealth resists this cycle by valuing what money can't buy: time, relationships, health, and purpose. Consider the story of a high-earning executive who realized his vacations were haunted by guilt over unreturned emails and postponed deadlines. He had banked thousands of hours of paid time off, yet never used them, equating time away with failure. When he finally took a sabbatical, enabled by savings and company policy, he rediscovered himself, returning with refreshed vision and deeper bonds with family. His wealth, once measured in zeros on a pay stub, found its worth in well-spent days. Wealth as freedom also demands intentional boundaries. Housel recommends setting flexible but firm rules, like never invest money I might need in the next 5 years, to safeguard margin. He encourages aligning spending with values, traveling to deepen cultural empathy, donating to reflect gratitude, or learning new skills to foster growth. As you consider your own financial journey, ask, what freedoms matter most? Is it the freedom to pause, to create, to care, to be present? How would your life change if you traded a bit of consumption for a bit more margin? Envision the day you choose your own schedule, support a cause you believe in, or simply rest without worry. These are the days wealth is truly alive. Wealth's greatest grace lies not in what it buys, but in what it gives back. The ability to live life on your own terms, guided by purpose rather than pressure. When money becomes a servant rather than a master, its power shifts from accumulation to liberation. And in that freedom, we discover our richest self. Darius sat across from his financial advisor, the glow of the trading screens painting his face in hues of green and red. He had built a substantial nest egg, enough by many measures to retire decades earlier than planned. Yet he couldn't stop. Each new milestone seemed to vanish as he chased the next, leaving him restless, unsatisfied, and anxious about market swings. Across town, Emily closed the door on her modest townhome, pausing to admire the single oak sapling she'd planted in her backyard. She'd invested diligently for years, but decided long ago that $4 million in the bank was more than enough. She framed her financial plan not in endless accumulation, but in defining enough, the point where the pursuit of more yields to the joy of having enough to live the life she values. Morgan Housel warns that identifying enough is perhaps the most powerful financial decision we can make. Without it, success becomes a moving target, and even the wealthiest among us can feel impoverished in spirit. Darius's endless chase mirrored a tragic cycle. Each new windfall raised his aspirations and his anxieties until money dictated his happiness rather than funding it. Defining enough requires honest introspection. What experiences genuinely enrich your life? For Darius, it was time with family, travel to unfamiliar cultures, and mentoring young entrepreneurs. But he'd never paused long enough to calculate how much capital he needed to support those passions. His advisor had warned him, "You can always earn more, but you can't buy back the years you waste chasing what you don't need." In contrast, Emily mapped her enough across 3 dimensions: core consumption, her basic living expenses; margin of safety, 3 years of living expenses in liquid reserves; and joyful discretionary, funds allocated for travel, hobbies, and philanthropy. That framework anchored her to a clear target, neither too little to leave her vulnerable, nor so much that she felt compelled to hoard rather than enjoy. Yet even defining enough isn't a one-time act. Housel highlights the need for tail safeguards, preparing for rare, unpredictable events that can derail well-laid plans. Anna, a graphic designer, thought she had enough when her investments hit the 7-figure mark. Then, an unexpected downturn wiped out nearly half her portfolio. The twin shocks of market loss and forced asset sales taught Anna that enough must include buffers for black swan events, pandemics, wars, sudden health crises that financial models often underestimate. Tail safeguards can take many forms: diversified assets across geographies and sectors, insurance for health, disability, and property, flexible spending that can contract in hard times, and human capital resilience, skills and networks that allow for career pivots when industries falter. For Emily, that meant maintaining her artistic practice and professional connections even after moving to part-time work. For Anna, it meant keeping a portion of her savings in ultra-conservative accounts, accepting lower returns in exchange for absolute stability. The interplay between enough and tail safeguards becomes especially critical when life's unpredictabilities strike. Housel recounts the story of a retiree who, at age 75, faced a sudden cancer diagnosis. Though her investments had grown well beyond her comfort level, she realized that medical bills and reduced earning capacity threatened her quality of life. Her enough had been defined in ideal health. Tail events forced her to reassess. Because she had waited too long to account for downside risks, her late-life plans became constrained by fear rather than enriched by freedom. Conversely, a couple who integrated tail safeguards from the outset, maintaining 10 years of living expenses in treasury bonds, carrying robust health insurance, and cultivating consulting networks, navigated the husband's layoff and the wife's unexpected caregiving needs without fraying their financial or emotional fabric. Their enough remained intact because they had honored the uncertainty baked into every plan. Defining enough also reshapes how we perceive success and wealth. When Darius finally paused, he realized that his health, eroded by stress and late-night screen sessions, was more precious than any portfolio balance. He redefined enough downward, trading the thrill of ever-higher returns for the calm of a 9-to-5 routine, family dinners, and weekend hikes. His advisor noted, "Your returns may slow, but your happiness will soar." And so it did. Housel's closing message is clear. Money's greatest power lies in giving us control over our time and priorities, but only if we know when to stop. Endless pursuit without boundaries leads to a hollow wealth, devoid of meaning. True financial mastery is not in maximizing every dollar, but in optimizing our lives, balancing enough with resilience for the unknown. As you chart your own enough, consider these questions. What does enough look like for you? Financially, emotionally, spiritually? Which tail events keep you awake at night? How can you balance ambition with contentment, preparation with flexibility? The answers will shimmer differently for each of us, guided by our values, histories, and dreams. When you place your enough marker in the sand, you reclaim money's role as a tool, not a tyrant. You build a fortress of self-knowledge, fortified by bounds that protect not only your wealth, but your sense of purpose and joy. And when storms appear, from global crises to personal trials, you stand ready, not merely to survive, but to thrive within the boundaries you've thoughtfully drawn. May your own financial story end not with an unceasing chase, but with the serene confidence of knowing you have enough, and the grace to safeguard it against life's wildest tempests. Wildest tempests. Wildest tempests. Wildest tempests. Wildest tempests. Wildest tempests.